Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
18% of children now leave school as low achievers, but of course, today we find ourselves addressing the question of how many children will skip school altogether today in order to show their solidarity with the opposition to, or the attempts to, fix climate change. It's an interesting one, that. I suspect that Greta Thunberg will be recorded as one of the most significant individuals of the 21st century, but as, what's his chops? Justin. I always want to call him Pierre. As Justin Trudeau has discovered, the things that you do in the past can come back to haunt you. So if Greta Thunberg turns out not to be one of the most significant figures of the 21st century, I'll put my acknowledgement and admission of a mistake in early. So we'll talk about that first. We will move on to Justin Trudeau, and I suspect we'll also find time for the question of why children are leaving school with no qualifications on a much greater scale than they were just a few years ago. It's a 24% increase since 2015, but hey, glance at the polls and no one seems to think it has anything to do with the incumbent political party. 4 minutes after 10 is the time. Here's a nice one as well. I put a side order of this on just because, like me, you enjoy a little bit of semantic pedantry occasionally. Semantic pedantics, it would be called if I was ever to turn it into a board game. A council has baffled residents and historians by planning to change its name because people struggle to pronounce it. I'm going to spell it for you. And then in the course of the morning, we're going to examine the various different ways in which it can be pronounced. Oddly, we took a call yesterday from, was it Kirby Lonsdale? There's quite a lot of Kirbys in North Yorkshire, Kirby Moorside. There's loads, and that's another odd one. Kirkby, you could pronounce it as, and yet Kirby you do. Beecham is one of my favourites. It's words that posh people pronounce in really unexpected ways in order to have a secret way of being able to tell the likes of you and me, the plebs, from the likes of them, people who've inherited their wealth and position. So Beecham Square is generally spelt Boat Chomp, and Chumley Warner. Chumley Warner is an absolute classic, probably why Harry Enfield chose it for the name of his character. But we digress. It's spelt B-A-B-E-R-G-H. B-A-B-E-R-G-H. I don't think they need to change the name of the town or the village, because I get about the third attempt at how it's supposed to be pronounced. Most of us would get there. But we digress. 6 minutes after 10 is the time. And, well, I saw a photograph of Australia this morning. And if it was accurate, I'm not going to lie to you. My wife showed it to me. I'd only just woken up. But if I didn't do due diligence on it till. I hope she's not listening. I wasn't actually paying that much attention. But the photograph appeared to show tens of thousands of people gathered in Sydney as part of this Extinction Rebellion / climate change protest. It's a global strike today, which has followed on. And again, I'm a little embarrassed that I'm not as across all of the details and all of the background to this story as perhaps I should be. But it does all go back to one schoolgirl finding herself so upset by the failure to address the climate change crisis that she asked herself a question most of us never bother to answer. She asked herself the question, what can I do? What can I do? A 16-year-old schoolgirl in Sweden, of course, Greta Thunberg. What can I do? And she decided, I think, and as ever on the programme, if I'm getting stuff wrong, then the phone lines are wide open. She decided to stop going to school on Fridays because I suppose she knew that would at least draw the attention of the adults. Is it that simple? What else can you do as a schoolgirl? If you consider something to be of enormous importance, if you consider something to be of, absolutely epic significance, what can you do? Sorry to go off on a slightly odd one on this one, but it fascinates me, this. I think most of us in our really honest moments are conscious of ducking a lot of our responsibilities, a lot of big issues. We claim to care, and we do care in a sense. We do care. But how much will you do? And then there are, of course, all of the voices whispering in your ear that you shouldn't make any effort at all because, I don't know, something about China or India or something like that. And the more we learn about the effort and the expenditure and the tactics employed by the fossil fuel lobbies over the years, the more we realise just how many of our friends and families have been infected by that paid-for propaganda. A lot of it, of course, coming out of outlets that won't tell you who pays for their work. Not hard to join the dots there, is it? So what do you do? I blame Greta Thunberg about twice a week for my own personal discomfort, because under pressure from my children and partly inspired by her, the tiny little thing of no longer getting a car and driver into work in the mornings and instead hopping on public transport with everybody else means that quite regularly I don't have anywhere to sit in the mornings. It's why the show's gone downhill so much lately. I used to sit in the comfort of my chauffeur-driven limousine listening to various other broadcasters on various other radio stations, picking over the morning's news before deciding what it is I was going to talk to you about. Now, well, I'm underground, so I listen mostly to the Lighthouse family while reading historical fiction. It's why the show's gone absolutely tonto in recent weeks. I have no idea what's going on in the news anymore, and it's all Greta Thunberg's fault. I've also got a bit of a nagging pain in the bottom right-hand corner of my back because I have to stand uncomfortably some mornings. Today I had a rucksack wedged firmly under my nose by someone who'd clearly got on at Heathrow after travelling without showering for the last 6 months, and I had the particular pleasure of being rammed up very tightly against them and their luggage for at least 6 stops. And that's all Greta Thunberg's fault. But I mention it partly because it's a little bit pathetic. It's not all that we do, obviously, but also because if everybody, I think I realise this thanks to her, there are millions of children on strike today. Just think about that word, millions. Millions of children right around the world are not going to school because it is clearly the only means available to them that draws the attention of the adults. Isn't that incredible? Well, we've all done it. We don't need no education. We don't need no school control. Oi, teachers, leave us kids alone. That kind of idea that by abandoning school you can somehow focus the attention or draw the attention of the adults. So it's been in every schoolboy and every schoolgirl's heart for decades. Well, not centuries. Didn't get school then. But that's the point, isn't it? It works in the sense of drawing attention, focusing minds. And, of course, then you can activate your, I don't want to say right-wing. This is one of my new missions for the coming months together. These are the sort of ideas I come up with when I'm listening to the Lighthouse family and reading historical fiction on the London Underground instead of following the news. I want to try to steer clear of left-wing and right-wing. It's not left-wing to care about the quality of the air that you breathe. What we're allowing to happen is right-wing is coming to mean big money and big business should be able to do whatever they want. And left-wing is, in some contexts, coming to mean, well, no, they shouldn't. It's great that they want to make a ton of money. We need that. We need that kind of entrepreneurial flair. It's an engine that drives our economies and our societies, but there has to be a lid on it. You know, if it turned out you could make an enormous amount of money from killing children, we'd be opposed to that. So there's always going to be limits on it. So it's just a question of how you're killing them. If you're killing them by belching vile gases into the atmosphere long after you knew that they were poisonous, then it's time for government and law to intervene in much the same way that they did with tobacco. Despite the decades spent by the same sort of lobbies and the same sort of shills and the same sort of interest groups pretending that there was nothing wrong with tobacco. So it works, in a sense. But does it work in the most important sense of all? Is this going to actually compel governments to do more than they currently do? I don't know. I don't know. If you think you can answer that question, I'll put you at the front of the queue this morning, 0345 6060973. Staff at London arts venues, including the National Theatre, the Tate Modern, Tate Britain, South Bank Centre, they're going to walk out to join the global climate strike. The Beano, which is a brilliant comic still, of course, despite existing in a very different market from when we were kids. The Beano has said that it supports the strikers. The UK Student Climate Network is aware of over 200 events that are taking place across the UK. Adults, for the first time, being encouraged to join the youngsters, and all because a Swedish schoolgirl looked at the science and despaired. and couldn't understand why grown-ups weren't doing more. And that is, I think, the question. I've given you a couple of theories. There's a degree of incipient guilt, isn't there, involved in not doing more. And it's an inconvenience. None of us really like being inconvenienced. But she just couldn't see why we weren't doing more. What would you tell her? Greta Thunberg was here. What would you say to her? And she said, why didn't your generation do more? What would you say? I'd love you to have a crack at answering that. You come at it from any angle you want. I'd love to know what you're doing today. Millions of children on strike in a globe. I mean, just incredible. But she wants to know why. And I don't really know. 0345 6060 973. It's a bit like an addiction, isn't it? It's a bit like we're so addicted to fossil fuels that any suggestion that we needed to wean ourselves off them would be greeted with a huge degree of scepticism. Then you factor in the huge amounts of money that are made from the purveyors of the addictive substances. And you begin to get a slightly clearer picture, perhaps, of why. But historians of the future will ask this question, and we'll start their work for them now. Why did it take a 16-year-old Swedish schoolgirl to focus the planet's attention upon its possible demise? The planet will be fine. It'll be us that are extinguished. So why did it take a 16-year-old Swedish schoolgirl, presumably she was 15 when she started, it's about a year, isn't it? A 15-year-old Swedish schoolgirl to focus humanity's attention upon the possible demise of the entire species? Go on, riddle me that. I haven't got a clue. 0345 6060 973.
It's hard to remember scenes like it ever in the world's greatest cities, all on the same day, streets packed with hundreds of thousands, all calling for political action on climate change. What started as a solitary act by a Swedish schoolgirl protesting in front of her parliament just 12 months ago has now grown into a global movement, galvanising not just the young who will inherit the problem, but those already living with it. Starting in Asia as the sun rose, followed by Melbourne, New Delhi, Kenya and Berlin. And tonight the protests continue across the United States, including on the doorstep of the UN, where world leaders will gather in 3 days' time to talk about the climate crisis. And it's a message surely almost impossible to ignore.
In London, they blocked the streets of Westminster. In Sydney, tens of thousands skipped school. In Kenya, they marched, knowing Africa's the continent perhaps most vulnerable to climate change. And even in Afghanistan, they came out, armed troops protecting the protesters.
What do we want? Climate justice! When do we want it? Now!
Millions of young people around the globe trying to send a message to those in power.
We just really need the government to immediately act. We need them to save our future.
At 13, Scarlett became the youngest person in the world to get an A-level in politics. Now she's 15 and disillusioned with politicians.
We've spent £100 million on Brexit advertising, yet there's nothing to tell our adults about the climate crisis. People call us irresponsible for striking from school, but we can catch up on one day of schoolwork. We can't catch up on the damage done to the environment.
It's become impossible to ignore the global groundswell of voices warning of a climate crisis. But will politicians here in Westminster and around the world really listen? And more importantly, will all this spur them into taking action?
Thank you.
This politician says he's listening. The Labour leader aligning himself with the protesters.
Showing our determination to combat climate change, protect our environment and our planet.
What would Labour do to tackle the climate crisis?
Invest in green energy industries and also quite a lot of rewilding in agricultural policies, but also properly measure emissions, including aircraft and shipping.
But the government's already committed to cutting emissions by 2050. Isn't that enough?
No, it's not enough. We have to go further and faster than that.
Is that realistic?
Yes, it is.
Meanwhile, away from the crowds, the government insists it is paying attention too.
Of course we're listening to people. I think in terms of the legislation, we've legislated for a net zero carbon emissions target for 2050. And we're the first country, big country in the world to have set that target. People are looking to the UK for leadership.
On this historical day, thank you all so much for coming.
In New York, the poster girl of this global movement addressed the crowds, hoping to influence world leaders coming here for the UN Climate Change Summit next week. While in Germany, the government responded by announcing a €50 billion deal to help businesses and households reduce emissions. This is the next generation of politicians. They say they want policies now that will protect their futures. And they say it's an emergency. Rebecca Barry, News at 10.
Well, all across the UK, thousands of children, their parents and teachers joined the protests, a school strike by pupils about their future and the world their generation will inherit. Dan Rivers joined some of those who took the day off school to deliver a lesson they say cannot be ignored any longer.
On a day when the world's children were called to act, across the country they answered in astonishing numbers. This was the scene in Bristol as thousands swapped school for the streets. Dr. Grace Thompson and 5-year-old daughter Kitty started their preparations early. The enormity of the climate change crisis is almost overwhelming her.
I can't look my kids in the eye, really. As a mother of 3 children, 5, 2 and 7 months, if I didn't really realise the scale of the crisis, and since I've realised that, I'd do anything to save their lives, really.
This family, like so many others, deciding to cancel other plans and head into the city centre. And there they stood in protest at what's happening to the planet and demanded urgent action. Some teachers were here too, like Caris Greenwood with one of her pupils, Evie, both out of class for the day.
I would say this is education, and actually it's a really important thing that children know about this and what they can do about it.
We're here because we want to make the world better.
But by far the greatest demographic were teenagers, who will inherit the consequences of inaction.
We should be in school right now, but we're on the streets striking because we have no choice. If we don't strike, then the action's not going to happen fast enough.
This is one of more than 200 climate strikes around the country, uniting both young and old. And the central message at each and every one of them: the climate crisis demands action now. Around Britain, the young reiterated that point through sheer force of numbers. In Brighton, the march stretched for hundreds of metres along the seafront.
Thank you, Birmingham. It's so good to see so many of you here today.
This was Birmingham's Victoria Square this afternoon, where there were many more people than organisers expected. And this was Edinburgh, again packed streets with many children demanding change.
It makes me happy just to see how many people are doing this to save this planet.
The overwhelming mood across all the gatherings was peaceful but passionate. Tomorrow's voters signalling to today's politicians that they should be doing better. Dan Rivers, News at 10, Bristol.
If she is successful, then historians of the future will ask this question. Why did it take a 15-year-old Swedish schoolgirl to focus the attention of the species upon its own imminent demise? Potential, possible demise. If she is not successful, well, it's probably slightly hyperbolical, but some people would dispute that. In fact, I think a lot of people would dispute that. If Greta Thunberg is not successful, there won't be any historians of the future to ask any questions at all. So why? Why did it take a 15-year-old Swedish schoolgirl? And why has this particular tactic proved so effective? A schoolgirl decided not to go to school one day. And today, a year later, millions of children around the world are emulating her example. It's incredible, actually. Incredible. Justin's in Epsom. Justin, what do you reckon?
Hi, James. Massive fan. Spoke to you a while ago.
Welcome back.
But Greta Thunberg,
yes.
just the most inspirational girl ever. I mean, when she turned up on the news last year, my children, I've got 4 children, started my own gardening company last year, I remember, and named the company after all 4 of them.
Oh, lovely.
And they sort of sat down and looked at it. I'm like, right, what's she doing? Didn't really understand. Then David Attenborough came out with his programme about extinction, about climate change and real facts. My eldest watched it, and it scared her. It scared her so much that she was crying and was asking what we're going to do about it. And from that point, we've made massive changes. We're now cutting all of our meat out of our diet. We're all going to vegetarian. We've decided that from now on, we haven't used the plane for several years now, but we're not going to. Whenever we go on holiday, we drive.
Yes.
We unfortunately, my wife has a diesel car.
I'm going to stop you there, because that's the point, isn't it? Is that if I was built a slightly different way, or God forbid, if I was in the pocket of some organisation that won't disclose its funding, then I would now say, car. And a little bit of us does, doesn't it? Because you just mentioned your wife's car is diesel. We've got a diesel car. We haven't sort of got rid of it yet, although we're very conscious of having bought it because we thought it was environmentally friendly. And now we're getting hit over the head for having it. But I could go, car. You didn't catch a plane, but you did catch a car, you see. Why didn't you catch a train? Why didn't you go by pogo stick? And that's the impulse I don't quite understand. Here's somebody doing something. Let's kick his head in for not doing everything. You should be living in a cave and existing on nuts and berries. Do you see what I mean?
I must admit, on extremities, I think some of the wilder extremist rebellion would like us to do that.
Yes, they would, but so do the critics. That's the weirdest thing. As with so many things, the two extremities are a lot closer to each other than they are to the rest of us. If you're not living in a cave and knitting your own sandals, then you're part of the problem, not part of the solution, pal.
Exactly, I totally agree with you. I mean, it is crazy. I mean, if you're not doing everything you possibly can to do it, then you're damaging the planet.
Yeah.
And there's no ifs, ands, or buts. It's like, right,
it is a weird one. Very weird. I guess it's
sort
of guilt slightly. I used to have this problem with vegetarians because I'd feel that they were silently judging me and that they were right to do so. So you just need to get rid of your own sort of psychodramas to see other people's motivations more clearly.
Yeah, you do. I mean, that's the thing, you know. With my kids, they're like going, right, well, let's do this, let's do that.
Yeah.
And we're just slowly but surely cutting everything down.
And that's all that most of us can do, because, you know, life and addiction, it takes a long time for a society to wean itself off something. Try and answer this one for me, then. Why? Yeah. What was it about her? Because it's cut through into your family in the way that she has, whether you like it or not, and me and Justin both like it, it cut through into millions of families in ways that nothing else ever did. So what was it about her that was so special?
She started. I think she started, or she continued a wave that always is there. David Attenborough's Blue Planet 2. I think that woke a lot of people up to the problems we had with plastic, and then a lot more information started coming through. I think it's the amount of information now that's being sort of let out and sort of the media's sort of looking at. And I think she sort of put her finger on the button and went, look, the climate's absolutely dying. We need to do something about it. We need to start organising ourselves. And she bravely decided to sit outside her school.
Outside the Swedish Parliament. I mean, it's a year ago. A year ago. It's incredible. I mean, has anybody ever had this kind of impact this quickly?
No, I mean, and look what she's done. And a lot more people are waking up to this. It is about standing back and going, right, what can I do? In any little way. I've got rid of, it's like bamboo. We have bamboo toothbrushes now.
Do you really?
Yeah, awesome things. But, you know, they're better than the single-use plastic ones.
Yeah, and there'll be something else you could do, which would have involved going even further. I can't remember what it is. What did we get the other day that was weird? But toothpaste in a jar, and I can't remember, we saw it in a shop. But there's always somewhere further you can go, and that, historically, of course, is what the bad people use to condemn the people who've gone a little bit like Justin and many of us have. We're could do more, but we're doing a lot more than nothing. And then, of course, people on both extremities get their knickers in a twist about that and say, oh, you hypocrite, you still, I don't know, you still use your mobile phone, for example, or you hypocrite, you still catch a bus instead of a pogo stick. In fact, even a pogo stick has a carbon footprint. You shouldn't be using a pogo stick. You should be roly-polying everywhere. And at the other extremity, you've got the people saying, well, it's all very well you not getting a car into work anymore. Why don't you jog? Why don't you cycle like I do? So the two extremities are as bad as each other, as in so much of life. Justin, thank you. Paul's in Porth in Wales. Paul, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Paul. What's on your mind?
Well, I'm going to give a quote by the late, great Albert Einstein.
Yes.
We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them.
Okay, I like that.
And Greta is one of those, I think, thinking differently.
She's just thought, well, yes, but why has it worked so well? I mean, the more I think about it, the more incredible it is that a year ago, last August 2018, a 15-year-old schoolgirl in Sweden found herself so profoundly upset by the state of the planet that she went to stand outside Parliament with a placard, and people came to join her. It's one of those things you want to watch on fast forward, isn't it? Because there'd be that trickle of people to start with, presumably a little bit of jip, people thinking she was weird, giving her a hard time, and then a few more people stand alongside her. And a year later, millions of children around the world have been inspired by her. What was it about her? I don't think I can let you get away with just saying she was new or different. What ignited this astonishing reaction?
Can I point you towards a book if you never read it?
No, because it has to be for the benefit of people listening to this radio programme, Paul.
Benefit for people as well, because this kind of thinking goes back as far as 1962.
Yeah, but that's my point. What is it about her that succeeded where everything else failed?
Well, basically, how can I don't want this to sound bad, but one spark can start a fire.
Yeah, but we're going to part as friends before we indulge in any more sort of greeting card style slogans. Exactly. What is it about this spark that succeeded where so many previous sparks had failed? Andy's in Tunbridge. Andy, what do you reckon?
Hello, James. First time I've spoken to you. Yeah, I've taken the day off work to go to my sort of local protest. It's just something that I've felt now over the last few years in particular that I've had to sort of change some of my habits.
How does your boss feel?
They're fine about it.
And you've taken a paid leave, have you, rather than a kind of form of industrial action?
Yes, it's as leave, but
okay.
They're very supportive of that. I mean, I actually work in public sector anyway, and I suppose there is a kind of an acceptance,
a consciousness of the greater good rather than simply serving the shareholders and the bottom line. We'll have that debate another day. But tell me a bit about Greta Thunberg, if you would. What do you think? In case anyone feels we were a bit curt with the last fellow, why did this spark succeed when all previous sparks had fluttered out?
The only thing I can really put my sort of finger on is the fact that perhaps she is a minor, and that she has actually done something that other people have not done, in as much as she's been able to embarrass us as adults to be able to show leadership that people of my generation have traditionally.
She's got no history either, has she, really? I know they tried to dig up various accusations that if she didn't have wealthy parents, I think they may have been pop stars, and she didn't do this and didn't do that. But there's no history there, so they can't accuse her of hypocrisy or double dealing in the way that...
No, obviously they have accused her, they've used her Asperger's as a stick to beat her with in order to...
They've tried to, but as she has herself said, I think it can be construed as a superpower. I know that it can make people very anxious, and it can add to their concerns about things. So it may be both a positive and a negative. And it may give her the thickness of skin, perhaps, to put up with some of the stuff she's put up with. I don't know enough about the condition.
I think it's definitely focused her mind. Perhaps she has used that as a strength in order to be able to channel her energy in a way that
Well, maybe it
cut
lets you
other
shut
people
out the
off.
noise. So for the rest of us, we'd be thinking, well, of course I should save the planet, but I've got to do my homework first. Or, of course I should save the planet, but I've got to get a pint of milk on the way home. Or, of course I know I should be saving the planet, but I've got a radio show to do, or a book to write, or a floor to wash, or a lawn to mow. I don't know enough about Asperger's to offer this as anything but a theory. Maybe it lets you shut out all the noise and just say, well, hang on a minute, none of that other stuff matters. We've got a planet to save.
Possibly, and certainly from my own perspective, we've, in our family are now trying everything that we can do. You've spoken about, that we've, people still use cars. I mean, I still use a car, so
yes, of course you do.
I don't consider myself any kind of martyr or any kind of model for this.
It has to hurt a little bit. I mean, there needs to be a degree of sacrifice because you are giving up something to which you have become addicted through convenience. But again, Incorrigible FCA has just tweeted me pictures of Hobart in Tasmania, where 22,000 people are attending the rally, which makes it the biggest strike action that Tasmania has ever seen. And a 15-year-old Swedish schoolgirl set that ball rolling a year ago. That's just incredible. Why has she been so successful? 10:31 is the time. It's almost a Brexit-free Friday, but here's a beautiful illustration of just why and how the madness has unfolded. People getting excited over the headline on Jean-Claude Juncker's interview with Sky yesterday about the possibility of a deal and the desirability of a deal. He said pretty much exactly the same thing in the European Parliament on Wednesday, but he said it in French, so it didn't reach the English media. Seriously. 10:36 is the time. Ian is in Galloway to steer us back to the question of why Greta, and I'm told by a Swedish correspondent it's correctly pronounced Thunberg, but I'm not Swedish, so we'll stick with Thunberg. Why has she succeeded where so many failed?
Good morning, James.
Hello, mate.
I had a friend who's a primary teacher, and the first lesson that the kids got when they went to primary one, was reduce, reuse, recycle.
Yes.
So Anna would set those kids on their parents to separate the rubbish out.
Yes.
And
yes.
Greta has done exactly the same thing to you. She's shown the other kids how they can act, and then Greta's set your kids on you, and now you've got you facing someone's armpit every morning on the tube.
Happy days. Although I've just been offered a berth in Lee's cab on the district line if he happens to pull in and sees me feeling sorry for myself on the platform. So every cloud has a silver lining, and that works. Why? Because we were receiving these messages from all sorts of sources.
Yes, but you weren't being pressured by your kids.
No, I mean it's not your fault, but I've oversimplified it because I've felt my own sands shifting on this as well, and the children simply perhaps accelerated or focused it. And that still doesn't provide a full answer, because most of the time we tell the children to shut up and go away, don't we, as parents, when they're trying to get us to change our behaviours. You say, I think you'll find I'm the grown-up and you're the 10-year-old. Now, pack up your troubles in your old kit bag and off you trot.
Yeah, but all the climate scientists are there in front of you, and they can sit there and look at you and go, really?
That's not what parents are supposed to do. Stop being evidence-based, rational, and acting in the interest of the species, and toddle off over there and write a blog about how awful trying to stop climate change is.
These things take time. I had a delicatessen in Edinburgh, it's called Herbie, and we used to sell sustainability to the middle classes.
Oh, yes.
If you wanted a plastic carrier bag, we charged you a 10 pence fine, donation to Greenpeace for gratuitous use of non-renewable fossil fuels, and things like that. And we were selling unpasteurised cheese, and
yes,
talking about food and the fact that slow food tastes better, so you can use less cheese to make a cheese sauce. It'll still be just as cheesy, but it won't be so full of fat. And we slowly sold this message into the middle class in Edinburgh. And if you look at Edinburgh now, there are more green councillors and MSPs in Edinburgh than any other city in Britain. We slowly sold that idea into society.
I doff my cap to you, and I don't think you're going to like the thought that has occurred to me when you said that, is part of perhaps the perceived problem in the past is contained within that little two-word phrase you just employed so casually and correctly, middle class. Somehow that's been turned into a pejorative. I don't understand why. I'm looking at it. But whether you're talking about reading books or Jamie Oliver trying to get people to feed their children better food, you use the phrase middle class to describe it, and it becomes a negative. She's managed, because your efforts are clearly successful and perfectly motivated, but she's managed to sidestep all of that kind of trash talking, hasn't she? Mostly.
Yeah. But again, she's all the kids.
Coming through the children from the bottom up. Has it ever happened before? Has it ever happened before where children have...
No. But there again, it's the kid. It's like, I won't use the word, but at the same time, young people don't want this thing, and old people do. The subject that we're not discussing.
There we go. Yeah, no, you could be right about that. I wonder whether they'll have similar success in seeking to turn that ship around. But is that it? I mean, is there simply a point at which the kids will not be ignored, the children will not be ignored? I genuinely don't know. I think there's not one answer to this, as many answers as there are callers today. 03456060973 if you want to join their number. Thank you, Ian. The phone line wasn't great, so I shall detain you no longer. Michael is in Tufnell Park. What's going on, Michael?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Pleasure to speak with you. First-time caller. I'm just kind of faffing about the flat quickly before heading off to the climate strike thing down in Westminster. I think part of the reason why Greta has really kind of caught on is in part because she's not existing in isolation. People can see things in the news. You know, there's endless plastic. The coral reefs are dying. There's wildfires in Australia, in California. Obviously, the Amazon is burning. You know, like how many football pitches a day? People are seeing all this. You know, there's the Greenland glaciers, which are melting at like billions of liters of water a day. I think people are seeing this, and they're kind of, whoa, what? Hey, what? Sorry?
Yes.
I thought we were custodians of this planet, but I think people are starting to really realize that maybe we're really destroying it, and it took Greta's kind of simple clarity. I think that's been
so she becomes like I'm seeing her as the tip of a pyramid almost, or as the sort of focal point for a lot of disparate but similar concerns, and then you sort of think that's too huge for me to do anything about, which most of us have thought. I don't know about you, but I certainly have. You sort of find yourself, you're in the foothills of a mountain and you've got two choices. You either start climbing or you deny that the mountain exists. So you look up and you think, blimey heck, that's a big mountain. Let's deny it exists. I don't fancy climbing that. Whereas she's going, well, I'm going to try and climb it even if it kills me. And we all feel a little bit embarrassed.
But I think she's also inviting people to kind of think about the things that they can do in their lives. Like, she's not kind of, you know, like you're saying to the guy earlier, oh, you're driving a car, so that's a bad thing. She's like, you know, we as a people have to start thinking of ways with which that we can kind of change our own lives and do things like, you know, my big bugbear right now has been plastic. Anything that I can use. I used to use the carry bag from the shop as, you know, I think to throw the rubbish now. Now I'll use anything that is like a plastic bag, you know, the pasta bag, the chips bag, anything that can be used as a bag. You know, people are carrying their own bags around, and that's like a big step. But I think
and people got their knickers in a twist about that, didn't they? And I mean, it's just slowly filtered through quite easily into society. I forget what the numbers are, but it's been an unqualified success. And the idea that you keep a carrier bag in your handbag, or you keep a carrier bag in your knapsack, and it follows it quite straightforwardly.
And I mean, she certainly brought the conversation to like a wider audience and made people really think about it.
Why? Because I don't get it. Because I was a very bad news journalist. I had an appalling nose for what would entertain news editors. I was only ever interested in what entertained me. Luckily, I've found a job that allows me to indulge that prejudice. But I would never have thought that a 15-year-old Swedish schoolgirl would achieve anything, let alone a global reaction on this scale.
But I think she's made people realize that there is no planet B, as has been said many times.
Yes.
Like, you know, and she is, whether it's the power of her thing is like she is going to like people, you know, the major leaders of the world and saying, you're not going to be affected by this. You will be gone in 10, 15, 20 years, whereas I have 50 years yet to live. And if the science is correct, by the time she gets to middle age, 50, 60, you know, how much of the planet will be really habitable?
Do you know, of course, the corollary question here. Good luck, by the way, at the protest. Whereabouts is it? I mean, what exactly are you doing? You're going down to the park?
It's down in Millbank. I think for me, it's just about being one, like, you know, if I'm only kind of like ahead in an aerial shot of many thousands of people that are kind of marching down there, then I think size matters.
Yeah, of course it does. That's beautifully put. Stay safe. There's been a couple of arrests, I'm told, down on the Strand, but I'm sure that you won't be engaging in any sort of conduct that might come to the attention of the authorities. Although, you know, history suggests that sometimes you do have to crack a few eggs to make an omelette, from the sort of suffragettes right through to apartheid. 10:44 is the time. 03456060973 is the number. The other question that I don't think we can answer, the sort of Darth Vader to Greta's Luke Skywalker. Actually, no, Darth Maul. Darth Vader came good in the end. Is the question of how they could have done it. I mean, there is some household name American billionaires normally to be found funding sort of far-right propagandists and that kind of thing. But they die too. That's the bit I never quite got my head around. Is it this complacency born of the belief that, well, there will be an escape route and we are the richest people on the planet, so we will be in it. We will get out. And until then, we'll carry on milking the species for as much money as we can humanly make. And you are talking about some of the richest people ever, you know, funding climate science denial. And funding it with people that reach right up into the highest echelons of British governments. You've got former chancellors of the Exchequer caught up in this con. And that, I guess, is the question that we'll never know, that level of greed. 03456060973 is the number you need if you want to help me address the question from the other end, which is, why has this girl, this young woman, succeeded where so many failed? Even David Attenborough. I mean, he did some great work, and he drew a lot of people's attentions to the issue, but he didn't do as much as her. He clearly didn't, because it's not his name on the lips of the millions. I'll say that again. It's a great word. Millions. Nick used to have a funny way of pronouncing million. I've forgotten. The millions of people. It's her name that are on their lips today. How come? Couple of suggestions that the Children's Crusade of 1212 is an early example of young people leading adults to the promised land or to the light. With the greatest of love and respect, this is a rare example where my very, very esoteric history A-level comes in. Yeah, I don't know why we ended up studying that period either. But you need to swat up on what the Children's Crusade actually was. Essentially a kind of a bogus mission to convert Muslims to Christianity, built upon claims that children had had visions of Jesus telling them to do that. But all of the children that hopped onto the boats believing that they were embarking upon God's work, I think they ended up in slavery in North Africa, most of them, because the merchants buying into the rhetoric of the Children's Crusade were more interested in profit than human life. So there are parallels to be drawn with Greta Thunberg, but not necessarily the ones you thought. Again, apologies if I got a decent grade in my history A-level, but if I've misremembered that, then I shall hand my certificate in on the way out. I'm going to play you a little clip of Greta Thunberg. As ever, my dedicated listener, I'm Incorrigible, has been feeding me relevant nuggets as we talk about it. This is a lovely moment where she addresses that. And it's a genuine argument. Sometimes I hear a caller say something to me, I tear the caller's head off, nicely. I mean, it's a figure of speech. And it turns out that all they're doing is parroting what they've got out of the usual right-wing mouthpieces and organs. So this idea, there's no point us doing anything because something about China or India, that's... I mean, I didn't think that was worth addressing, but obviously if it reaches into the highest levels of politics and media, then it's a little bit unfair of me to have a crack at people who've swallowed it rather than the people who've served it up. But this is rather nice. This is her giving her testimony in Congress, I think. 10:53 is the time.
I have not come to offer any prepared remarks at this hearing. I am instead attaching my testimony. It is the IPCC Special Report on Global Warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius, the SR 1.5, which was released on October 8th, 2018. I am submitting this report as my testimony because I don't want you to listen to me. I want you to listen to the scientists. And I want you to unite behind the science. then I want you to take real action.
10:53 is the time. So there's a simplicity of message there, isn't there? And then there's a lovely clip, which I'll play to you later, of a Republican congressman trying to pick her up on that point about why should we do anything when there's people over there doing much, much worse things. And her response to that is beautiful as well. But it still doesn't explain why she's succeeded where so many had failed. Sam's in Dartford. Sam, what do you think?
Yeah, hi, James. Just a couple of points that I wanted to make. I think in the current sort of climate at the moment of the Me Too movement and people sort of recognising women as equals and recognising that their power is of their own. You've got this articulate 15-year-old young woman who sort of embodies that. She's not bowed by middle-aged white men telling her what she should do or telling us what we should do. She's sort of this normal kid who's got a message that is fitting to... Do
you think that even without realising it, I love that, what you point out, I don't know that white is particularly relevant in this piece, but I understand why you've said it. It's just a sort of usual suspects, and it's an issue we'll move on to with Justin Trudeau, oddly. But do we have, even those of us who like to think we're immune to this sort of idiocy, we've all got in the back of our brains, what's her game? What's the grift? What's in it for her? And
I think that's like another. The other point is that we're all thinking that, but she's not selling us anything.
That's what I mean. So even with Jamie Oliver, when he's trying to persuade people to make their children more healthy, you could say, well, he's getting very rich out of this, and it's not fair, but it's a way of undermining someone who's perhaps making you feel bad about your own behaviour.
Yeah, because there's other very high-profile climate sort of activists, Hollywood's megastars who are then still jetting around, multimillionaires who are flying around doing their press, and they're sort of pushing this message.
And they love to... I think Emma Thompson was the most recent recipient of that kind of coating and kicking, wasn't she? And that she offered support for Extinction Rebellion. Immune from all the usual forces of nastiness.
Yeah, it's like you said, the whole sort of, that nagging feeling of what are they trying to get? She's a 15-year-old girl from Sweden. She's not got a brand. She's not affiliated to a big sort of climate charity. The fact that in her clip there to Congress, she just wanted They
can't even point at her salary, can they? Because I think when she wins awards, she gives the money to the campaign group, so they can't even because again, what you could describe as the forces of virtue signalling, people who are desperate to poo-poo and malign anyone who tries to do the right thing, even if they sometimes get it wrong. They can't land much on her. They've tried, and some of the criticism has been violent. It has referenced her Asperger's, but it's not sticking, is it? They must be furious. They must be furious.
I think the comments she made about her Asperger's being her sort of superpower, I think that plays into it because she's so not unaffected by the emotion of it, but obviously the way that Asperger's works and that the not recognising the human, the emotion of conversation, it makes it, she's just very... It doesn't seem to faze her.
We can't help but think that there must be a link between the thickness of her skin and the clarity of her mission and her Asperger's syndrome. I don't know enough. I know we've got the mother of a lad with Asperger's waiting to talk after the news. She'll give us more insights on that. But if we're looking for things that make her different from all that has gone before, it's highly likely that that's a part of it, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, you could... It's, quite not extreme, but you can draw parallels with history of, Joan of Arc, that sort of young female figurehead that, whether she did or, the history, whether she...
somehow managed to motivate adults in a way that adults hadn't managed to. So you're not the first person I've heard. Mate, you're not the first person I've heard make that parallel. It's probably more pertinent than the Children's Crusade one. Sam, thank you. This is even sort of pithier in a way. If you are a parent, James, she hits the core of your being. Change the world for your children. And she's right. 03456. I don't think we'll carry on with this. I never could get these to sing before. It's a mark of how successful she's been, oddly, just to bring it back to basics. I could never get these topics to work before because, no offence if you fell into that trap, but usually the switchboard would just fill up with people who hadn't really got the first idea what they were talking about, but they'd read a blog on the Daily Telegraph website, or they'd heard some mysteriously funded think tank member on the news talking about it, and they just repeated those arguments, and it was a waste of everybody's time. But the ball has moved perceptibly and profoundly and hopefully permanently. And we will talk about Justin Trudeau's appalling conduct. Quite unbelievable, actually. There is a lovely sort of subtext to it, of course. People who spend their lives pretending not to be racist will be cracking out the champagne today. Because somebody who spends his life telling people not to be racist has done something racist. It's the closest they ever get to honesty, is the glee that they feel on a day like today. You'll see it in the papers at the weekend, I imagine. The glee is, ha-ha, you see, everyone's racist, even the people that say racism is bad. And we'll never actually come out and admit that we are racist, but it's great to see someone who says racism is bad doing something racist. But I think we can park that as a side order. What the hell was he thinking of? I genuinely don't get it. I wonder whether some people need an explanation of why blackface or blacking up is so offensive. I think I'm pretty clear on it. Even if you are a profoundly progressive and liberal politician like Justin Trudeau, and I don't think he's lied about any of that, then you just don't do it. Because I think it hinges upon a perception, and I think it even deserves to be described as explicit rather than implicit. It's the perception that there's something inherently funny about having dark skin, isn't it? And this is, we're all on learning curves, but this is what the pastiches, the parodies, the stereotypes do. They hinge upon the notion that there's something inherently funny and or inferior about dark skin. I think a lot of, white men of my vintage are nowhere near as, quotes, woke, end quotes, as we think we are. But I can't think of any other explanation for a white person blacking up for laughs except a belief that there's something inherently funny and or inferior about dark skin. It's exactly the same sort of racism that Boris Johnson displayed when he talked about smiling pickaninnies with watermelon. He talked about pickaninnies with watermelon smiles, didn't he? That kind of it's what the old dolls used to play to as well, that portrayal, the dolls that used to appear on jam jars. Do you know, when I started doing this job, people still got their panties in a bunch about not being able to have racist dolls on full display. A couple of politicians, probably UKIP, who were still crusading about the Robertson jam doll that was clearly a reflection of a different age when racism was not regarded in the way that it is now. Is that going to come to Justin Trudeau's rescue? I don't think it is. I think in 2001, the idea that you thought it was funny to wear black face makeup and pretend to be Aladdin or Jamaican, it is just racist, isn't it? I don't know what happens next, but and I apologise if people finding it funny offends you. There is a little bit of hilarity to be had in the hypocrisy. And I can speak, I think, with some knowledge on this issue. If you have found yourself telling other people how to behave in the context of these sort of issues, you could call them isms, I suppose. If you have found yourself telling other people how to behave, which I do routinely, then you paint a huge target on your back. If you're found to be less than squeaky clean, or dare I say, not whiter than white, then they'll come for you. They just will. And you can understand why. But my God, to have a target painted on your back and to have this in your locker, to have this in your background, and to have so much of it in your background that you can't guarantee there won't be more. I can't remember how many times I used black face makeup before going to parties. Oh, man. presume in Canada that politically he's unstoppable, but this is a huge bump in the road. It's 7 minutes after 11. We'll get onto that conversation a little later. I want to play you that full clip of Greta Thunberg, or Thunberg for my Swedish listeners, because it does address that ludicrous position that there's no point us trying to do anything because some scumbags over there are doing loads of really bad stuff.
I am submitting this report as my testimony because I don't want you to listen to me. I want you to listen to the scientists. And I want you to unite behind the science. And then I want you to take real action.
If you're sailing across the ocean and you're picking up trash along the way, and for every one piece of trash that you pick up, there's a boat right next to you dumping out 5 pieces, how would that make you feel?
First of all, we were going so fast, there wasn't enough to pick up any trash.
All right, well, if you were a slow sailor like me, how would that make you feel?
Well, first of all, if you use that logic, then I am also dumping a lot of trash in the ocean. And then I would stop dumping my trash in the ocean and tell the other boat to stop dumping their trash in the ocean as well.
And that's the important point here. I think that what we need to be doing is we need to be focusing on the countries that are dumping trash in the ocean. Of course, that's a metaphor.
When your children ask you, did you do absolutely everything in your power to stop the climate crisis, when the storms are getting worse and we're seeing all of the effects of the climate crisis, when they ask you, did you do everything? Can you really look them in the eye and say, no, sorry, I couldn't do anything because that country over there didn't do anything, so if they're not going to do it, then I'm not? That is shameful, and that is cowardly. And there is no excuse to not take action, to not improve as much as we can in the United States.
Another perspective, I am from Sweden, it's a small country, and there it is the same argument. Why should we do anything? Just look at the US, they say. So just so you know, that is being used against you as well.
She's so cool. So, because you go, what about China? What about India? And of course the answer is, well, hang on a minute. You know, we're Swedish. They tell us that there's no point doing anything because America's so bad. And take that right to the heart of Congress. The middle voice was a 17-year-old climate activist called Jamie Margolin. And listen, if you are getting cross and struggling to find the courage to call in, try and work out what you're getting cross about. What is it that they've done to you to make you think that a 16-year-old girl trying to save the planet is your enemy, and a billionaire who doesn't care whether you live or die but just wants your money is your friend? And that perhaps helps explain why it's become a left-right issue. I don't think it's helpful that in our news bulletin it said that Sadiq Khan and Jeremy Corbyn will be attending. You know, Zach Goldsmith, a Conservative MP, has done loads of work in environmental fields. It's not left-wing, right-wing. But if they can turn it into left-wing, right-wing, then they can persuade people to act against their own interests, as we've seen, you know, not mentioning the B word, but... Look at immigration and union representation. Or it's left-wing to stick up for workers' rights. But you're a worker. You think that's bad? Wait till you get onto human rights. Oh, human rights. Down with human rights. Are you a human? Yeah. Well, you want fewer rights? I never really thought of it like that. Can we just talk about dolls on jam jars again and how PC it is that you're not allowed to have that? Oh... Do you see what I mean? As soon as I hear the words left-wing, right-wing, I think, what's the game? What's the con? And that's why I wish, I don't know if there are Conservative politicians turning up today, but if there are, I would hope that we could include their names in our coverage. A bit more on this. Why? Why has she pulled it off? Robert is in Cork. Robert, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi there. Yeah, well, one of your earlier callers touched on it when they mentioned Joan of Arc. And I think one of the...
Really?
Yeah, I think so, yeah, because one of the qualities that Greta's got is a sort of almost archetypal martyr-like quality. And you kind of see this. So did you read the Brendan O'Neill piece in Spiked?
Where It'd take a while, guess.
Right, okay. So, I mean, it's not a good look, a middle-aged man having a go at a teenage girl who's just speaking in that kind of pure, simple way.
What use this person as a kind of generic critic of a certain type. What is the criticism, precisely?
Well, he was saying that she's like a cult leader. She's spooky. She's scary. She's got sort of a weird sort of voice about her.
Oh, really?
And it was quite personal and quite vicious. And it's not a good look. I mean, for a middle-aged man to be saying these kind of things. But strategically, please let him keep on saying things.
Did he say the look of apocalyptic dread in her eyes or something like that?
That's the kind of thing. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
One can imagine her in a sparse wooden church in the Plymouth colony in the 1600s, warning parishioners of the hellfire that will rain upon them if they fail to give up their witches.
That's the kind of stuff. Well, I mean,
and that's not a parody. That's a real person.
No, that is what that's what he said.
Well, it's a living.
You've got it right in front of you. I haven't got the.
The producer just popped it in front of me. Yes, that's what it is. Apparently, she's just double checking because she could see on my face that I didn't believe you. I apologise. I take it back.
No, that's all right. So he's putting her into the martyr box. He's putting her right into that box of the sort of the Joan of Arc, and she's quite happy to do that. I mean, I don't mean she's sort of consciously or politically doing it. You know, she has that kind of natural quality, and it means that people having a go at her and being vicious to her just enhance that quality. And there's nothing like martyrs to bring out that sort of sense of because this is. I mean, the reason why people are in denial about this is because it's morally salient, isn't it? It's not just a factual issue to a lot of people. It's taken on moral aspects. So when you've got characters in there who sort of embody those aspects, you either have to try and put them in a different box, or you have to deny that they're real. That's what sort of Alex Jones does with the kids getting shot, doesn't he?
Yes.
He says, well,
I thought it was just me that can see links between all these things. I'm glad that you can as well. It's sort of because it is just a game plan, isn't it? It's a tactic. And the question is, how do you persuade people to act against their own interests? And the answer is almost always the same: invent an enemy, or malign the people telling the truth, or seek to conflate people telling the truth with people who are lying. #fake news, and they'll do the work for you. And there we are. So with her, she just doesn't work. Because all of the traditional tactics, they go over her head. They miss.
It does work, but it plays exactly to the kind of person that she is. I mean, she's happy to take on that kind of role. And I'm not suggesting there's any cynicism about her at all.
No, well, that's the point, isn't it? So you can't accuse her of virtue signalling or of secretly trousering checks from George Soros or whatever these poor souls are being served up today by people who are laughing at them as they conned them all the way from climate change to Brexit. It just doesn't work with her, does it?
Well, the virtues that she's signalling, she has. I mean, there's a genuine use of the term.
Tell you what, if it turns out she blacked up 2 years ago for a birthday party, all bets are off, aren't they?
That would be interesting to see. But no, she does have those virtues, and so the signalling is, in its biological sense, is genuine. It's an honest signal because she's willing to take the hits.
Yeah, well, and doesn't even perhaps see it that way. I'd love to interview her, but I don't know what happened to Julia, who was going to talk to us a bit about Asperger's. I don't. Possibly she had to do something else. I kept her on hold for too long. But I'd love to interview her, but I don't know how illuminating it would be because I think she sees the world slightly differently as a result of her syndrome. I don't know. I'm a little uncomfortable speculating on Julie, but there is something close to unique about her. In the context of conduct, behaviour and achievement, there is something unique about her, full stop, period. To link the two, I don't think it's irresponsible. 0345 60 60973 is the number that you need. A little bit more on this, and then a little bit of Justin Trudeau. It's almost as if the news was designed for radio phone-in hosts today. Having a fascinating off-air conversation at the moment that I feel I should share with you. What's the most amount of money you'd spend on a coat? This is what happens when you have a presenter who's approaching 50 and male, and a producer who's a long way off 30 and female. We've got rather different attitudes on this issue. 20 minutes after 11 it's a coat. I can't... We should get Dan Oxfam. Looking at Greta Thunberg and the question of why she has proved so successful when so many went before? And there's a bunch of answers, but I was interested in talking to Julia because your son has Asperger's syndrome, Julia, and you think that is probably pertinent to Greta's success.
Hi, James.
Hello.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, my son's now in his 20s, and so I have obviously intimate experience of bringing up a child with Asperger's. And when I see Greta Thunberg, I absolutely see parallels with my son. There are very defined characteristics of people with Asperger's, and some of them things. If I can give examples, things like obsessive, being very obsessive,
yes,
and it could be, and often people with Asperger's will fix on one thing, and that will be their utter obsession, and they will do it to the detriment of everything else. And
now that would normally be a negative, potentially.
Yes, exactly. But in this case,
how interesting.
How lucky are we that this is her obsession?
So it could be. I please forgive me if this is an inappropriate observation,
yeah, sure.
but I met a lad once, oddly enough, on a TV show. And he was only he was younger than Greta, actually, but he had Asperger's syndrome. And if you gave him 2 locations on the British Isles, he could tell you from A to B, even if you were practically going from Land's End to John O'Groats, exactly which roads you would go down. So he'd say, you come out of your own road. He'd know the road that you lived on. And say, and then you turn left, and then you turn right onto the A456 and head up towards Bromsgrove. I mean, it was incredible. and no harm done, but not much use in the great scheme of things, especially not in the days of sat-navs. Whereas for Greta, it just... Well, is that fair on her, though? Because that takes away moral saliency, that takes away urgency and just files it under a weird obsession that happened to be good for the rest of us.
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
Isn't
but
it?
I don't think, in her case, I really think that she clearly cares. She clearly cares about the planet. It's not an obsession with facts, is it? It's because she's thinking also about the future.
Well, yes, and the science is close to the facts, so she does keep saying, I'm not here to make arguments, I'm not here for the rhetorical flourishes. Please listen to the science.
Yes, and I think it's really important that we don't see people with Asperger's as robots and just memorising facts. Because, I suppose people are humans too, and it's just that they have a different way of seeing society. They kind of feel separate. They feel as though they're outside looking in.
Let me read you something.
Which is also why they can defy authority sometimes, as Greta does, defying her school.
Because you can't rationalise it. If you weigh up the 2 priorities, obeying school rules, saving the planet, you can't. It's not going to be distorted. I'm going to read you something from a friend of mine who's autistic, and she's been in touch this morning. She says the barbs will hurt to varying degrees, of course. She's human. But for an alien, feeling alienated from the general herd is just another Friday, I'm afraid. Tactics that wrench at neurotypicals, which is a word I've recently learned, meaning people who don't have conditions and syndromes or aren't on the autistic spectrum. So tactics that wrench at neurotypicals, like isolation, ostracism, even gossip, are all a bit of a muchness to autistics.
Yeah.
It's not that we're not emotional, but there's always at least one meta-narrative running over the everyday noise, often several. It can be migraine-inducing, but it can make us somewhat decent thinkers. And there's something there, isn't there?
Yeah, and that's brilliant.
Isn't it? Yeah, she's one of my best listeners. One of my most...
Goodness me, I wish I'd written that.
Well, you don't need to. No, you can just download the podcast and pretend that you did. But there is something there, and like you say, you've got a ringside seat. So to you, it just makes intuitive and immediate sense as the mother of an autistic son. For my correspondent there, my friend there, it makes immediate sense as someone who is themselves autistic. She adds, ask me anything about the cats in Cats the Musical, the Rock Band Queen, or Harry Potter. Obsession isn't automation, it's a deep, passionate love. Wow. And so my parallel with the boy with the roads was unfair, because that's a deep, passionate love for roads. If you think about it, there's a logic behind that as well, you know? It's like my weird enthusiasm for bridges, because I've realised I see them as an evidence of humankind's overcoming nature. You know, a bridge means that we can... Well, I don't need to tell you what bridges do. It's all gone a bit Partridge. But that's the point, isn't it? That there is a logic to it. And for her, the planet I mean, the passion is... The question shouldn't be why is she so successful. In many ways, we should be trying to work out why everyone else failed. Dave's in Truro. Thank you, Julia. Dave, what would you like to say?
Yeah, so basically, I mean, I had three reasons why I think she's so successful. The third reason I was going to come to...
I'm not going to be able to hear you. I don't know if there's anything you can do about your phone line or what's going on in the background, mate, but it's... let's try again anyway, because you've phoned me all the way from Cornwall. Go on.
Is that any better?
A little bit, quickly.
I'm on a march at the moment.
Well, then I take it all back. That's me. What a rubbish radio presenter trying to get rid of someone who's reporting live from the scene of the protest. My apologies, Dave. Carry on.
Yeah, so basically there were three reasons. The third one you've covered now. I mean, I have Asperger's. My daughter has Asperger's. And it is, you have a passion, and it is an unrelenting passion that you... Simply everything else just falls by the wayside.
Yes.
But actually, the other two reasons that I was going to tell you about is that one, I think the proliferaton of social media is one of the biggest things that would have helped her cause.
Of course it is.
In the current day, rather than past campaigners.
Yes, of course it is.
She can do a TEDx talk, and all of a sudden that can be shared a million times in 5 seconds.
And all that money spent on buying up print media and infiltrating it with think tanks and lobby groups that refuse to disclose their funding, all of that is struggling in the face of... I mean, that's why they're now spending fortunes on their own social media, because the truth is out there.
Well, exactly. And then also she has the truth on her side, yes, which cannot be refuted. But the other reason as well is the fact that she does have no agenda. She is not a hypocrite. You know, as you said before, Jamie Oliver, he intends to, yes, very good-natured initially, but actually he intends to sell books.
Yes, and he's not. I mean, the stuff he does, I happen to know because he's a pal of mine. A lot of the stuff he does in the arena of social good, it costs him money, but that doesn't matter if you're determined to criticise him. Are you in Cornwall, or have you driven to London?
No, this is Truro. There must be 20,000 people out in Truro.
Shut up.
Smallest city in the country, yeah.
Are you serious?
Yeah, it's massive.
That's magnificent.
We've all got our kids out of school. I've taken a half-day's holiday. Did 2 hours in the morning, and I'm going to have to go back to work after this. But
good for you. Good for you. My girls let me off when they said I should go on strike, and I said, but what if my holiday cover doesn't talk about the climate change crisis? Well, it doesn't talk about the strike. Can I ask you a question? And I hope I'm not offending you. When you said
go ahead.
And I know you live there, but when you said it's the second smallest city in the country, was that a sort of typical Asperger's observation or not?
Well, St David's is the smallest, isn't it, in Wales somewhere?
I don't know. I just wondered if you knew that as a result of having all of these facts, all of these things at your fingertips. I just said it was Ely in Cambridgeshire, but there you go. We digress. Dave, thank you, mate. 20,000 in Truro? Hashtag fact check. And do we have a full number for how many people are on the streets of these islands? And then the question of how a 15-year-old schoolgirl in Sweden sowed a seed in August of last year that today has grown into millions and millions of metaphorical trees right across the world. 20,000 people in Truro. 20,000. Holy moly. It's coming up to 11:30. We'll take the very latest news headlines, keeping a very close eye on this. I mean, I love change, as you know. I think it's really why we exist. And as I often tell you, there's no point having a mind if you never change it. But the shift here is a thing of beauty. I couldn't get arrested when I tried to talk about these issues 10 years ago. The battlefield, if you like, was completely dominated by mysteriously funded think tanks and right-wing bloggers and all sorts of weirdos. And it took this girl to ride the wave of science in a way that nobody had managed previously. I say girl, I know not everybody likes that, so I'm happy to withdraw and say young woman. Speaking of doing one's best to do the right thing, we'll be talking about Justin Trudeau. There are astonishing scenes. There's amazing scenes up and down the country. And the Truro figure, I'm supposed to be the journalist here, but as ever, it's you that's schooling me. Up and down the country, there are gatherings of thousands upon thousands of people. Quite an amazing day. And I sometimes wonder that I get a little bit gaslit or groomed. The picture from South Africa, have a look at... I mean, it's just incredible. I keep talking about this country. This is unbelievable. This is happening on our watch. And what is amazing about it, and I'm afraid to my shame, I can only comment on this from the perspective of the British media, possibly even only the English media, it's passed us by because they are so infested with the lobbyists and with the denial. You know, the so-called think tanks that all operate out of the same building but won't tell you who pays their bills. They've got one. They've got a climate change one. They've got, people available for interview who have never been near a science book since school, but who are wheeled out by various media platforms to somehow offer up, quotes, balance, end quotes, to people who've spent their entire adult life studying this stuff. And that didn't change anything, but Greta Thunberg somehow has. And it's incredible. But it is, and this is where I think the caller from Truro made a brilliant point about social media, and it is also why the deployment of the dark arts on social media has now become a massive priority for the kind of outfits that all operate out of the same building but won't tell you who pays their bills or their wages. They're now trying to address that because this has grown up organically for British consumers. You're not getting this from the pages of your newspaper. Even if you read The Guardian, there's only about 250,000 of you in the country. So this is what the future looks like, a bit, for now, I think. Do you want to know what the past looks like? Well, for Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, it looks very, very dodgy. Very, very dodgy. And we are going to move on to that. But there are so many people waiting to talk about this subject that I'm going to crack on because, it doesn't happen live on the radio very often. And I should perhaps have had a much better idea of just how big this was going to be, given that my own family have been telling me for a few weeks. But even, all of us are a little bit guilty of turning our hearing aids down sometimes, aren't we, metaphorically speaking? And this is astonishing. Caller there from Cornwall saying there's about 20,000 people in Truro. I don't know the exact figure. We'll double check, but it's not abnormal. Pictures from Nottingham, pictures from up and down the country. It's quite incredible. And then, of course, the big question becomes, how come now? And how come her? And I love the answers that we've received so far, but none of them will be enough to put together a PhD thesis, and there will be PhD theses written about Greta Thunberg. There will be books written about her. There will be statues put up, possibly in every country in the world, if she pulls it off, if we turn the oil tanker around. But there is, of course, still, despite the enormous success today of this protest, this climate strike, there is no guarantee that it will be pulled off. If it is, historians of the future will be fascinated by her. If it isn't, there won't be any historians because there won't be much of a future. 11:38 is the time. Dear James, writes Sue, I love your show. I think you are mistaken about Justin Trudeau. He was in fancy dress like you would put on a Pope's costume. He was portraying another race. Is that wrong? Someone else asks, was Laurence Olivier racist when he blacked up to play Othello? It's a good question. The answer is no, he wasn't, but Shakespeare was indulging in contemporaneous racist tropes when he wrote Othello. Iago, being, as Coleridge famously observed, the vessel of motiveless malignancy. Iago was super Machiavellian and intelligent, the white right-hand man. Othello was the Moor. He was the great big black man who couldn't control his emotions and could be manipulated by Iago. So there was a degree of racism in Othello, yeah, just as there is in The Merchant of Venice. We don't quote Shakespeare for it because it wasn't just normal at the time. It was the only worldview at the time. I don't know that Trudeau deserves a similar defence, but we'll find out. So it's always nice to challenge the people who are normally cheering me on, and I will today. I think it's racist. Quite where we go with that thought, I'm not sure, but you can't. I mean, you can't say he thinks it's funny to put on black makeup, and I don't. I can't quite ever imagine that I would. But never say never. 11:40 is the time. Ali's in Wellingborough to steer us back to Greta Thunberg. What do you want to say, Ali?
You know what, James, just want to say I'm really, really big fan of your show and you as a person as well.
Well, steady on. You hardly know me as a person, mate. As a presenter, I'll take that to the bank.
OK, as a presenter, I've been listening to you over the last month, and the knowledge that you've given me is just insane. Now I'm listening to your radio station every day. But going back to the Greta Thunberg thing, and basically what I think
Keith just said, Ali, there is a book, you know. I didn't say that was Keith, all right, but I'll leave that hanging.
OK, I'll buy it, as long as you can sign it for me.
Of course I will.
So basically what my sort of 2 cents on it is that in order for like such a big change to happen, it has to come from or sort of a change in outlook from society. Like, has to come from the voice of it has to come from the people that are being negatively affected by it. So, for example, Greta Thunberg and all of the children across the world, they're going to be like the next generation that are going to be feeling the effects of these climate change. Another example would be examples that I've sort of been thinking about as I've been waiting on the phone, where this has sort of happened and people have been remembered by it, is like Rosa Parks sitting at the back of the bus. All of these people are met with a level of resistance. So you've got Rosa Parks, the suffragettes, even just things like punk music, like people wearing the bags on the streets because there were strikes going on from rubbish, and people hated that at the time, but and it sort of gets faced with resistance from the societal norm, but then you sort of have to have that in order to move forward. And I think that we're going through a stage at the moment where some people are saying, making excuses.
It's
whatever.
I struggle sometimes to get my analogies pitch perfect, but it's as if everyone presumed you had to play by certain rules on that pitch, and people like Rosa Parks or Emmeline Pankhurst come along and say, no, actually we don't. The principle is more important than the pitch, and Greta Thunberg perhaps is one of those, and one would use the word visionary, I think.
Yeah, well, I think from my perspective, I'm a postman, and we're going to be going on strike soon as a result of this guy called Rico Back, who's basically we had this agreement last year, and he's kind of going against the agreement that was reached within the union and stuff.
Okay, I haven't got the details in front of me, but that sounds pretty clear.
So it kind of it relates in the sense of management and the people that are sort of controlling the direction of a certain don't usually change things for the better, in my experience of what I've observed in the past and what I'm experiencing now. And so we're going to have to go on strike in order to make that better for the future people. Yes, when we're on the gates of the the delivery office, people are going to be heckling and all this because they can't, I don't know, they're probably too busy, I don't know, they might not see it for what it is, but from our point of view, nobody else is going to do it, so you have to do it, and you have to meet that sort of negative...
And it's quite easy to turn people against you because you can play to their own feelings of guilt and or shame that they're not stepping up to the plate. So historically, whatever you want to take, industrial action in the postal service or Jamie Oliver trying to encourage people to eat more healthily, or somebody, J.K. Rowling, trying to get people to read books, you can just turn around and say, who do they think they are telling us what to do? Flipping heck, do-gooders. And it feeds something quite unpleasant that I think is inside all of us. And the effort and the expenditure that goes into feeding it is historically huge compared to the effort and expenditure that goes into fighting it, until someone like this comes along, or until people stand up and say, actually, everybody out. We're not up with this, we will not put.
That's it, and I think what's really, really sort of good in the Greta Thunberg instance is that, or with the climate change and stuff, is that I remember your first caller, people like him and like me, they listen to their children.
Yeah.
When your child has something, you care so much about them that you want to do anything for them. So parents are actually backing their children for these strikes and stuff because they care about what they've got to say. So...
you want them to. You want them to care about the world they live in, don't you?
Exactly. And whereas in the Royal Mail there's 100,000 staff across the UK, that's a lot of people, but there's an awful lot of children in the world.
No, you're right, and they've got it. They've seen it. They've seen it clearly in a way that their parents had failed to do so. Historic. Ali, thank you so much for the kind words. It keeps me warm at work. 11:45 is the time, and I do reject the left-right analysis. Some of you are a little bit unhappy about that, but there are plenty of people who could vote Conservative and care about the environment. There are plenty of people in Parliament who are Conservative and care deeply about environmental matters. I mentioned Zach Goldsmith earlier because he is the most prominent and the most obvious. But if you wanted to find a distinction to describe the two sides, I think it would be, we'd again be back to 19th century revisionism, wouldn't we? So, because what the last caller, what Ali just reminded us of with regards to the children and listening to them, is the opposite of that perspective, which is that children should be seen and not heard, which is a Victorian message. And there are, of course, political forces on the grounds at the moment who are quite open about missing Victorian values, you know. You don't come out and say it, but they think your kids should be up their chimneys, metaphorically speaking. People like Ali and me think that your kids should be listened to, first of all, by you, and then, if they're making an awful lot of sense, by everybody else as well. As long as they never dress up as Aladdin, which we will move on to, I promise you, shortly. All right, we'll take this up till 12, because there's plenty of people ringing in who've never rung me before, never rung LBC before, and it's always nice to hear fresh voices. And then we will crack on with what Justin Trudeau has done. I don't really understand why, as a fully paid-up member, some might even argue a patron saint of metropolitan liberal elitism, I don't know what woke means either. I think it means awake, i.e., you're awake to reality. But quite how you use that as an insult, I don't really understand. So down with those people who are awake. It's much better to be fast asleep or unconscious of reality. Yeah. Anyway, I don't feel very sorry for Justin Trudeau at all. I think he's ridiculous. I truly do. Do you remember when he changed someone saying mankind to people kind? I think we've all got limits, perhaps, on our progressivism. And we've all got an ability to feel impatient or irritated by other people's moral compasses. I'm slightly surprised to find myself rather enjoying Justin Trudeau's embarrassment. He's not a politician I've paid particular attention to, but I appreciate he's supposed to be a figurehead for those of us who are passionately opposed to stupidity, backwardsness, bigotry, racism, and he has. He's owned himself, hasn't he? But quite a few of you are questioning my confidence, my certainty at this point that what he did was racist. I think he has concluded confidently and with certainty that what he did was racist because it's born of discrimination and mockery. But I will take your slings and arrows of outrageous objection after 12. Before that, at least 2 or 3 more calls on Greta Thunberg. Nick's in Finchley. What do you think it is that explains her success, such as it is, Nick?
I think, actually, that she is a prophet. In biblical times, you'd get people popping up, and they came from nowhere. And
You're not an RS teacher, are you, by any chance?
No.
In biblical times, you'd get people popping up.
Well,
Carry on. You would, mate. You would.
They would emerge, and they would speak truth to power, and they would have people would object to them, and they would get a lot of flack. But history would say they had the right message, and I kind of feel that Greta Thunberg is exactly that kind of person.
Well, hang on, I don't know. No, just pause. I don't like the religious stuff, because what she's dealing with is the opposite of belief and faith and religion.
I'm not saying that she's a religious person. I'm talking about the fact that she's bringing a message that we need to listen to, that in the past prophets would have done.
I prefer scientists, so I would give you, rather than Job or Jonah, I would give you Gerardus Mercator or Galileo Galilei. What she is someone who is telling the world that the world is different from what they thought it was, and we need to recognise that, or else.
I'm more than happy to accept that thing. All I'm saying is that there are people that pop up in history,
yes,
who have this visionary message that they communicate. You asked also at the beginning. You said, what impact will she have, or will the strikes have? I'm not sure that individually any one person or any one action has decisive impact, but I think it's part of the mood change, and I think she's playing her part. I think kids that are taking the morning off school are playing their part. They are changing the way we all gradually think about these things, and hopefully they're going to have that, play their part in changing the way we behave.
Amen. It's not even hopefully. I mean, it's not even slowly. This is a year. It was a year since she first stood outside Parliament and skipped off school to make her protest. And today there are millions and millions of people all around the world.
Yep.
In solidarity. I mean, that's
true.
incredible.
Absolutely true. But whether those with power act on that is yet to be seen. We haven't seen that much change yet. But, they're playing their part in making the change happen.
Yes, and the bigger it gets, then the more irresistible it becomes. There's a brilliant advert many moons ago. I don't know if you remember it. I think it was for Unison. It was for a big trade union. And it was kind of an ant, I think, or an insect came up against a big obstacle that there was no way they were going to get around it. And then there were millions of ants suddenly, and they could just pick the obstacle up and chuck it away. And then that's what, I mean, sorry to state the obvious, but that's what people power can be when it's a force for good. John is in, it says South Brent here.
Oh, hi, James.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm a little bit nervous, first time caller, all of that sort of thing.
It's only me. It's only me. We're all friends today. What's on your mind?
Good. So the point about, what is it about Greta that is capturing the imagination of, everything, I think it boils down, from my perspective as a parent, and I've got teenage kids that are on strike today, it's an innocence and a vulnerability that adults can see and empathise with, but also children can relate to in many ways. I've got a 14-year-old girl who's taken the day off, gone on the bus into Plymouth today to demonstrate. First time she's done a demo, but hey, she's seen me go down to London for the People's Vote marches left, right and centre.
You weren't the one heckling me, were you, John?
No. I was at the back taking photos.
That's it. And that there's something there, because, again, to kind of see it from the enemy perspective, to sow the seed of there being some malign motive or some self-interest or selfishness, you find yourself as an adult asking, why on earth is she doing this? And the only answer you can come up with is sincerity and passion and deep. You can't come up with anything else, however hard you try, because she's not in it for the money. She clearly doesn't give a monkey's about being famous, for want of a better word. Why is she doing this? And of course, inviting negativity from all the usual quarters. And the answer will be because she believes.
It's just genuine. It's 100% genuine. And I think, our generation can see that as that sort of beautiful innocence of youth. And, when she talks, you almost want to cry because it's so nice.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
I do. I mean, I really do. And I came to the party a little late, actually. I don't know why. I'm a bit embarrassed to admit this, but it's again, one of those areas where I've been a little bit behind the trawler as opposed to on it. But there's something about her, and it is unique.
Yeah.
And if it hadn't been for her, this would not be happening, would it? Were you proud when your girl went off today? I suspect you were.
Sorry?
Were you proud when your girl went off today?
Oh, very, yeah. I mean, helping her make her banner last night, and I've got a 16-year-old son. I think he's gone for ulterior motives, i.e. today off school. But even so, he's made a poster with that cartoon of Trump kissing Boris, and it's about...
it could be both. It could be both ulterior motives and a passionate desire to save the planet.
I would hope it's a passionate desire, because I certainly, I believe in all of that side of things. I've not got an electric car, but I would love to have an electric car if I could afford one.
That's next for us, and we can. So and Daimler have announced today. I mean, the pendulum is swinging because of people power. It won't change unless we make it change. And I think it's Daimler that's announced today it's giving up on the petrol engine, internal combustion engine, and focusing its future entirely on electrics. And Jamie Bartlett, who's a writer, has been in touch with a rather brilliant little quote from his own book that John just reminded me of there. And it's about what he calls the fanatic... Oh, I'm not going to be able to find it now. I'm such a muppet. I will find it for you, and it highlights perfectly and very, very pithily the bind that you're in, where if you do something but not everything, you're a hypocrite, and if you do everything, you're a fanatic. It's the hypocrite-fanatic bind. Beautifully explained. plug my own book so mercilessly on this programme. I find myself drawn almost out of a sense of guilt to plugging other people. So I'll read you that line from Jamie Bartlett's book shortly. And then I promise, with apologies to Helen and everybody else waiting to talk about this, we are going to crack on with a different subject. And that subject will be, despite old John here saying, why aren't the lefties talking about this? It's on the front page of The Guardian, mate. Why don't you get your head out of your backside and give me a call to talk about Justin Trudeau?